Great man of India, Gautama Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, 563 to 483 BC. Gautama Buddha was born around 563 BC at Kapilavastu. He was a Kshatriya, a prince of the Sakya clan, and his father was Sudhodana, the ruler or king of a strip of country 30 miles south of the foothills of the Himalayas and on the borders of Nepal. How the Sakyas came to occupy this land has been related in the following legend. Once upon a time, there was a king who reigned over a land called Potala. He fell in love with a beautiful princess and asked her hand in marriage. The princess accepted him, but added to her acceptance a curious condition. She would not marry the king unless he promised to appoint as his successor his youngest and not his eldest son. The royal suitor was too much in love to object. He married the princess, who bore him 5 sons. When the time came for appointing an heir to the throne, the king, bound by his promise, named the youngest son as his successor. At the same time, he banished his 4 eldest sons from the state and bade them seek their fortune elsewhere. The exiled princes set out, and after a long and tiresome journey, they came to a fertile land where lived an ancient sage called Kapila. They did reverence to him and begged him tell them whither they should direct their weary steps. The sage, pleased with their courtesy, counseled them to go no further, but settle down near his hermitage. This they did, and built a city, which in the sage's honor they called Kapilavastu, or abiding place of Kapila. They themselves took the title of Sakyas, or the brave ones. Sudhodana's father was a descendant of one of the 4 brave brothers, and for many years he ruled happily over a prosperous, if somewhat restricted state. He was, however, greatly distressed that no son had been born to him. Although for several years he had been married to 2 sisters, Maya and Pajapati, the daughters of the king of Koli, his happiness was to come. During the full moon festival of the month of Ashalyaha or Ashhad, June July, Queen Maya dreamt a strange dream. She dreamt that 4 great kings raised her and her bed, took her to the Manosila tableland, and then moved aside. Their queens took their places and bathed her in the Anotata lake, and put her on a divine couch, with her head to the east. A white elephant, bearing in its trunk a white lotus, appearing in the room, and after circumambulating the bed three times, smote her side with his trunk, and entered her womb. Next day, Maya told her dream to the king, who sent for his most learned Brahmins. They all agreed that the queen would have a famous son. If he stayed in the royal palace, he would become a mighty conqueror. If he renounced the world, he would become one of its wonders. He would be a great sage who would guide all peoples to the goal of truth and justice. The dream came true, for not long afterwards, Maya realized that she was to become a mother. Following what is still the common practice of India, Maya decided with the king's permission to give birth to her baby in her mother's house in Devadaha. a small town not far from Kapilavastu. Unfortunately, she either delayed her journey too long for reasons that have not come down to us or she miscalculated the date of her conception. On the way, she felt the birth pains come on. It was impossible either to return or to continue the journey, for the party were about halfway between the capital and the Devadaha. They halted near a wood known as the Lumbini Grove, but before the poor queen had time to lie down, she was delivered of her child standing. It is said that all nature rejoiced at its birth, that cool breezes blew everywhere, and that a bright light flooded the whole world. However this may be, the birth brought but little pleasure to Maya. She and her child were carried amid great rejoicings to Kapilavastu, but only 7 days after the delivery, the poor mother died. Her sister, Queen Pajapati, adopted the baby as her own and gave him all a mother's care. He received the name of Gautama and possibly the name of Siddhartha, but the latter may be a later appellation, for it means he who has reached his goal. Gautama grew up amid what were then deemed luxurious surroundings. Nothing sad or ugly was allowed near him. Beautiful maid servants surrounded him, and a host of men servants waited on him, and no doubt did their best to spoil him. When 5 years old, he went to a little school kept by a wise and learned Brahmin, to which only the sons of Sakya nobles were admitted. Gautama soon attracted the teacher's attention by his superior intelligence, and he became in time most popular among the boys. His chief companions were his half-brother Nanda, his cousin Devadatta, and a young Brahmin called Udayan. Unfortunately, Devadatta was bitterly jealous of Gautama's popularity and after a time grew to hate him, just as Duryodhana grew to hate Yudhishthira in the Mahabharata. A trifling incident brought matters to a head. One day, when Gautama and Udayin were walking in the palace gardens, they saw a flight of wild geese overhead. As they admired the graceful V formation in which wild geese are wont to fly, one of the birds pierced by an arrow fell at their feet. Gautama went to it, pulled out the shaft, and dressed the wound. As he was thus engaged, a servant came up and told him that the goose had been brought down by the prince Devatada, and that he had been sent to pick it up. Gautama refused to let him, and the servant returned empty-handed to his master. The prince himself came up and haughtily demanded his quarry. Gautama maintained that the bird was his because he had saved its life, while his cousin had only tried to kill it. Devadatta was furious. Gautama was no better than a preacher, he cried. A prince's duties included the chase, the use of arms, and the defense of his country in battle. Since Gautama still refused to surrender the wild goose, Devadatta went away, muttering fearful threats against his cousin. In spite of his threats, Devadatta seems to have done nothing more than spread rumors that Gautama was a mollycoddle who cared nothing for field sports nor martial exercises. He was therefore unfit to succeed his father as the king of a free and warlike people. The gossip reached Suddhodana's ears, and he became rather alarmed about his son's future. He had him trained in riding, archery, and swordmanship. The youth, the youth took to these martial exercises in a way that delighted his teachers. Soon the king felt justified in issuing a challenge to the young nobles of his kingdom to try their skill against the royal heir. Edwin Arnold, following certain Sanskrit authorities, has described the contest as a Swayamvara for the hand of the lady Yasodhara. So it was given forth that on the seventh day the Prince Siddhartha summoned whoso would to match with him in facts of manliness, the victor's crown to be Yasodhara. This seems, however, to be an echo of the epics, wherein both Ramachandra and the Pandavas won Sita and Draupadi at a Swayamvara. It seems more likely that the king wished by a public contest to establish his son's fitness for the Sakya throne. Gautama certainly proved it, for he beat his cousin Devadatta in archery, his half brother Nanda in fencing, and finally bent and strung his grandfather's bow, a feat deemed impossible of performance. As there was no longer any question of Gautama's royal qualities, the king very properly thought that the sooner so splendid a youth continued the royal line, the better. Without delay, he arranged his marriage, and the lady chosen was Gautama's cousin, Yashodhara, the sister of Devadatta. Once his senses were awakened by marriage, the young prince found a keen enjoyment in worldly delights. The chroniclers have reveled in exaggerated accounts of the splendor of his palace and of the number and charms of his concubines. But this type of pleasure palled sooner or later, and although the prince's vigor enabled him to endure the strain without injury, a time came when his active mind wearied of the company of his beautiful wife and mistresses. The tale runs that the king deliberately kept from Gautama's eyes everything that was not young and beautiful. One day, he saw as he was driving down the road, behind his four white horses, an old and feeble beggar. He inquired of his charioteer, Channa, the cause of the mendicant's weakness. To the prince's astonishment, Channa explained that old age and weakness were the common lot of all mankind. Gautama returned home and questioned the king, who consoled him as best he could and drove away his son's melancholy by an unusually splendid banquet. Some days later, the prince again drove out and saw a man in great pain lying on the road, and learned from Channa that pain and sorrow awaited everyone, even royal princes. During a third drive, Gautama met a dead man being carried to the burning ground. He received the explanation that all life at last ended in death. This legend is obviously imaginative. No child could grow to manhood, especially in a small state such as Kapilavastu, without seeing sick or dead men. And all children felt pain at some time or another. A far more likely cause of the change in Gautama was the reaction caused by worldly pleasure. It drove him back on his mind and started the inquiry common to nearly all young men whether the religion taught them gave a satisfactory explanation of the origin and direction of life. If priests could really influence the gods, why did they not obtain immortality and the fulfillment of all their wishes? If they could not influence the gods, what use was their intercession? Indeed, of what use were the gods at all if they either could or would not help mankind? The climax came when, again driving with Channa, Gautama met an ascetic in an orange collared robe. His head was shaven, and he seemed completely destitute. But in his face shone contentment, and his eyes glowed with spiritual light. Who is he? Asked Gautama. He is a sannyasi or anchorite, replied the charioteer. He has renounced the world and lives only for the quest of truth. Gautama was deeply impressed, and within him the desire grew to become himself a sannyasi and live for the pursuit of truth. Not long afterwards, Yashodhara bore him a son. The news rejoiced the king, for the royal line of the Sakyas would be thus continued. Gautama took a different view. He would now be immersed in the sansar or married life. No more could he leave his palace and dressed in an orange robe wander in search of truth. He exclaimed bitterly, my son shall be called Rahula, or impediment, and his name was duly given to the baby boy. Yet at first, Gautama was attracted by the beauty of his little son and enjoyed the congratulations showered on him by Sudodana's subjects. This mood did not last long. The king gave a mighty banquet to his nobles, with the usual accompaniment of dancing girls and music. But Gautama was now 28 and was weary of such entertainments. When he left the banquet hall, he found it impossible to sleep. At last he called Channa and bade him saddle his horse, as he could stay in the palace no longer. Gautama, however, was human, and before he deserted his home, he felt that he must look once more at Yasodhara. with whom he had lived so many years, and the baby Rahula, whom he had begotten. He returned to the threshold of his wife's chamber and saw her as she lay asleep on a pillow of flowers, with one hand on her boy's head. An intense longing seized Gautama to embrace his child for the last time, but he realized that if he did so, he would wake his wife and that her clinging arms would chain him to the palace. Sadly, he turned away, rejoined Channa, and rode into the darkness a penniless wanderer. As he rode, he had an experience similar to that of Christ. Although whether Christianity or Buddhism is the source of the legend, it is impossible to say. Mara, the spirit of evil, tried to induce Gautama to return home, promising him, if he did so, universal sovereignty. Gautama refused, but Mara followed him the whole journey, pressing on him glorious gifts if he gave up his enterprise. Unmoved, the saintly prince reached his destination, which was the bank of the river Anoma. There he dismounted, took off his jewels, and ordered Channa to take them and his horse back to Kapilavastu. Channa protested, offering to become also an ascetic and serve Gautama. The prince refused the offer, saying, "How will my father and mother know what has become of me unless you go back and tell them?" Channa reluctantly obeyed. Gautama, left alone, cut off his hair, gave his rich clothes to a ragged passerby, and walked to Rajgriha, the capital of the Magadha kingdom, a mendicant anchorite. In the hills near Rajgriha were a number of caves, and several were occupied by Brahmin teachers. Gautama attached himself to two of these in turn, wishing probably to probe fully the priestly doctrines before renouncing them. His first teacher, Alara, proved unconvincing, so Gautama left him for a second called Udraka. The latter proved no more satisfying than Alara. Both told him that it was only by penances that the priests obtained their superhuman powers. Gautama decided to leave them and test their doctrines by self mortification. He withdrew to the forest of Uruvela, near the existing temple of Buddha Gaya, and there, together with five devoted disciples, he for 6 years practiced the severest penances until he nearly killed himself. His fame as an anchorite spread like the sound of a great hell hung in the middle of the sky. Yet he never came near his goal. At last, as one day he dragged himself along, he fainted from sheer exhaustion. He recovered, and fully satisfied that the priest knew nothing, he turned his back on the tenants and gave up forever his self mortification. But his disciples had only been attracted by his penances, so they abandoned him and returned to Benares. Gautama was delusioned and a likely prey for Mara, the spirit of evil, who again attacked him and held before him visions of Kapilavastu, his familiar home, his beautiful wife Yashodhara, and the comely boy whom he had deserted and urged his return. Gautama, although sorely tempted, wandered on until he reached the banks of the Nairanjara river, where a kindly village maiden gave him a bowl of rice milk that she had meant to offer to the village gods. He sat down under a great tree, since known as the Bo tree or tree of wisdom, and through the long Indian day, he debated with himself what course to take. Worn out with starvation and exhausted by his thoughts, he fell into a trance like sleep.